They say grief makes you do crazy things. For me, it led to the Starlight Rest Motel. I came here looking for my sister, but now I'm the one who's lost. I follow a set of bizarre rules every night, not to feed myself, but to feed the building I work in. My name is Leo, and this isn't a job, it's a cage, and I think I'm holding the key to my own cell. The final stretch of highway leading to the Starlight Rest Motel felt like driving off the edge of a map. For the last hour, my world had been nothing but the twin beams of my headlights cutting a nervous path through an ocean of darkness, with ancient pines standing as silent, towering sentinels on either side. The radio had dissolved into static 20 miles back, leaving me alone with the hum of the engine and the frantic thumping of my own heart. I was chasing a ghost, and this was supposedly her last known location. 2 years. 2 years since my older sister Clara had vanished. The trail had gone cold for the police almost immediately, but not for me. It ended here with a cryptic postcard of a star-filled sky over a generic-looking motel and a single handwritten sentence on the back. Leo, I think I finally found a place where the stars don't move. Then I saw it. The sign for the Starlight Rest appeared suddenly, a splash of soft, pulsing blue and white neon against the oppressive black. It wasn't flashy or broken like most roadside motel signs. It was clean, elegant, and strangely calming. Too calming. As I pulled into the parking lot, another detail struck me as profoundly wrong. The lot was paved in smooth, uncracked asphalt. The white lines marking the spaces were crisp and perfect. The building itself was a long single-story structure, painted a pristine white, with doors of a deep, unblemished navy blue. There were no flickering lights, no peeling paint, no overflowing trash cans. In a place where decay was the law of the land, the Starlight Rest Motel was an anomaly of unsettling perfection. It felt less like a place of rest and more like a place that had been scrubbed clean of all life, all history. My beat-up sedan was the only car in the entire lot. I killed the engine, and the sudden, profound silence was a physical weight. No crickets, no distant traffic, just a stillness so absolute it felt like the air itself was holding its breath. Taking a deep one of my own, I grabbed my duffel bag and walked towards the office. The glass door slid open without a sound, admitting me into a lobby that was even colder and more sterile than the outside. The floor was polished linoleum, the walls were a stark white, and the air carried a faint antiseptic scent like a hospital that had been empty for decades. Behind the long, empty front desk, a single, perfect white envelope sat dead center. My name, Leo, was written on it in a precise, elegant cursive. My footsteps echoed unnaturally as I approached the desk. My reflection in the polished surface was a pale, distorted stranger. I picked up the envelope. It was cool to the touch. Inside, there was no welcome letter, no HR paperwork, just a cold, heavy metal key with a simple plastic tag that read "Office," and a small laminated manual, no bigger than my hand. The cover read, "Nightly Operations Manual." Not a welcome guide, not a staff handbook, an operations manual. Like I was here to operate a machine, I opened it. The text inside was printed in the same neat, impersonal font. There was no introduction. It just began. Rule 1. At midnight, vending machine C13 must be refueled. Insert one personal item of low sentimental value, e.g. a loose button, a strand of hair, a foreign coin, into the coin slot. It will dispense an item in return. You must keep whatever it gives you. I blinked, reading it again. Refueled? With a strand of hair? This had to be a joke, some kind of bizarre hazing ritual for the new guy. I almost laughed, but the dead silence of the lobby swallowed the sound before it could form. My eyes scanned to the next rule. Rule 2. Between 1 a.m. and 3 a.m., the basement laundry room will initiate a cleaning cycle. A low, rhythmic humming will be audible throughout the building. Under no circumstances are you to interrupt this cycle or enter the laundry room during this period. A chill, entirely separate from the cold air of the lobby, traced a path down my spine. A cleaning cycle that I wasn't supposed to witness. The wording was so deliberate, so sterile. It wasn't a warning about dangerous machinery. It felt more like a command to respect a private, almost sacred process. Rule 3. After 2 a.m., all mirrors in the common areas must be covered. The black cloths are located in the bottom drawer beneath the register. The motel does not like to see itself at night. I physically flinched at that last sentence. The motel does not like to see itself. That was the moment the fragile shell of my skepticism began to crack. This wasn't a prank. Pranks are meant to be funny. This was something else. This was methodical. The personification of the building was so casual, so stated as fact, that it was more terrifying than any overt threat. I glanced at the large ornate mirror hanging on the far wall of the lobby, its surface a perfect dark void reflecting the empty room back at me. Rule 4. If guests arrive after 3:33 a.m., they are not standard guests. Do not request monetary payment. Accept whatever they offer, e.g. a dried leaf, a smooth stone, a faded photograph. Provide them with a key to any vacant room and log the transaction in the secondary ledger. Do not engage in conversation. My mind raced. This was insane. I was supposed to trade a room key for a rock, a ledger for non-standard guests. It sounded like something out of a dark fairy tale. I thought of Clara, of her relentless search for the strange and the hidden corners of the world. Had she been a standard guest, or had she arrived after 3:33 a.m.? Rule 5. Never, under any circumstances, turn on the exterior pool lights to look at the water during your shift. What is in the water is not meant to be seen. A wave of nausea rolled over me. Unlike the other rules, this one felt direct, a raw warning of a tangible, visible horror. The implication was monstrous. What could possibly be in the water of a perfectly maintained pool that it had to be hidden by the night? I closed the manual, my fingers numb. My first instinct was to grab my bag, get back in my car, and drive until the sun came up. This was a mistake. I had walked into a place governed by a logic that was deeply, fundamentally broken. But then, the image of Clara's smiling face flashed in my mind. The postcard. A place where the stars don't move. This motel, with its unnatural stillness and its impossible rules, felt exactly like the kind of place that would have captured her imagination. If I was going to find out what happened to her, leaving wasn't an option. This job, this place, was my only lead. I had to play the game. I had to follow the rules. I stowed my bag in a small back room that served as a break area, the silence following me like a shadow. I spent the next few hours in a state of hyper-vigilant dread, acquainting myself with the front desk. There was a computer, but it was ancient, and seemed to only run a basic reservation software showing every single room as vacant. There were 2 ledgers tucked away in a drawer. One was a standard guest book, pristine and completely empty. The other was bound in dark, unmarked leather. The secondary ledger. I didn't dare open it. Not yet. As the clock on the wall ticked closer to midnight, its rhythmic clicks seemed to grow louder, counting down to my first test. I felt foolish, my heart pounding over what was almost certainly an elaborate prank, but I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched, of the building itself waiting to see what I would do. At 11:59 p.m., I stood up, my legs stiff. Vending machine C13 was at the far end of the main hallway, nestled in an alcove. It was an old machine, with a glass front showing perfectly aligned rows of snacks that looked decades old, but showed no sign of spoilage. My hand went to my jacket, my fingers finding a loose button on the cuff. It had no sentimental value. It was perfect. The clock in the lobby struck midnight, the chime soft but resonant, echoing down the empty hall. It was time. Holding the small plastic button between my thumb and forefinger, I walked toward the machine. The air grew colder as I approached it. I stood before it, my reflection a ghostly figure in the glass. With a trembling hand, I pushed the button into the coin slot. It didn't make the familiar metallic clink of plastic hitting metal. Instead, a sound came from deep within the machine, a dry, brittle crack. It was an organic sound, like knuckles being popped or old, dry bones settling into a new position. I stumbled back, my breath catching in my throat. A low whirring started, but it was wrong. It wasn't the sterile hum of a motor. It was a wet, guttural churning, like something digesting. A single light behind the dusty glass flickered on, illuminating one of the spirals. It began to turn, not with a smooth mechanical motion, but with a series of slow, deliberate jerks. It wasn't pushing a bag of chips. The spiral was empty. Yet it turned, and then something heavy dropped from the darkness behind it. Clunk. The object landed in the dispensing tray with a solid metallic finality. The strange noises stopped. The machine fell silent, as if it had never been active at all. For a full minute, I just stood there, my mind refusing to process what had just happened. This wasn't a prank, this was a transaction. I had fed the machine and it had given me something in return. Slowly I knelt down, my hand reaching hesitantly toward the metal flap of the tray. I pushed it open. Lying there, glinting faintly in the dim hallway light, was not a bag of chips or a candy bar. It was a key. It was old, made of rusted iron, with an ornate, circular head, like something that would open a treasure chest or a castle dungeon. It looked nothing like the modern keys for the motel rooms. It was ancient. It felt heavy in my palm and cold, so very cold. I looked from the impossible key in my hand to the long, silent corridors stretching out into the darkness on either side of me. The motel was a machine, a system with its own arcane rules, and it had just given me a piece of its puzzle. The question was it a tool, or was it the key to my own cage? This wasn't a list of safety rules. It was an instruction manual for something I didn't understand, and the motel had just given me my first tool. If you want to find out what this key opens, subscribe to the channel and leave a like. The night at the Starlight Rest is just beginning. My fingers were locked around the ancient key. The pitted iron so cold it felt like it was actively leaching the warmth from my body. Back in the sterile sanctuary of the front office, I placed it on the polished counter under the dim desk lamp. It didn't look like it belonged in this century. The head was a complex circular design, somewhere between a stylized 8-pointed star and a grotesque mechanical eye. The shaft was thick, and the bit was a jagged, complicated pattern of wards that hinted at a lock of immense complexity. A key for a place that didn't want to be opened. My first, most frantic thought was that it belonged to a room, a secret room where Clara might have left something behind, or worse, where she might have been held. My heart hammered against my ribs as I grabbed the motel's master keyring. I chose a vacant room at the far end of the hall, its navy blue door a dark void in the dim corridor. The modern key slid in with a clean metallic whisper. The lock turned. I pulled it out and tried to insert the iron key. It was absurd. The key was thick as my thumb. It wouldn't even fit into the narrow modern keyhole. I tried another door, and then another. The result was the same. It wasn't for the guest rooms. Driven by a frantic, desperate logic, I rushed back to the office and tried it on the front door, the back office door, even the petty cash box. Nothing. It fit none of them. Defeated, I slumped into the worn leather chair behind the desk, the iron key lying before me like a riddle. This place operated on its own set of physics, its own abyssal logic. The rules weren't about managing a motel, they were about appeasing a living entity. And this key, this was a part of its anatomy, a bone or a tooth it had offered me. For what purpose? As a reward for my obedience? A tool for a future task? Or was it a trap? An invitation to unlock something that should remain forever sealed? My mind circled back to the manual. You must keep whatever it gives you. That wasn't a suggestion. It was an imperative, a binding clause in a contract I had never agreed to sign. I glanced at the clock on the wall. 12:47 a.m. The minutes were crawling by, each tick of the second hand an echo in the profound stillness. Rule 2 was next on the agenda. The basement laundry room will initiate a cleaning cycle. A low, rhythmic humming will be audible. I had located the door to the basement earlier. It was a heavy, windowless metal door behind the reception area, secured with a simple deadbolt. There was no keyhole that matched the iron key. I had felt a primal urge to open it then, to see what a laundry room in a place like this looked like, but some instinct for self-preservation had stayed my hand. Now I waited for its cycle to begin, my nerves stretched taut. The clock struck 1 a.m. For a few seconds nothing happened. The silence remained absolute, so deep I could hear the blood pulsing in my ears. I let out a shaky breath, a small cloud of condensation in the cold air. Maybe the rules were conditional. Maybe they only happened some nights. It was a foolish, desperate hope, and it was shattered a moment later. It didn't start as a sound. It started as a feeling, a faint, subaudible vibration that traveled up through the soles of my shoes and into the base of my spine. It was a deep, resonant thrum, like a colossal tuning fork struck miles beneath the earth. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, the sound bled into the audible spectrum. It was the humming the manual had described, but the word was a grotesque understatement. It wasn't the mechanical drone of a washer or dryer. This was a sound that felt organic, a somatic threnody that seemed to emanate from the very concrete and steel of the building's foundation. It was a slow, rhythmic pulse. Thrum, thrum, thrum. It was the sound of a colossal heartbeat, or, more terrifyingly, the sound of something vast and ancient breathing in its sleep. The vibration intensified. A half-full glass of water I'd left on the counter began to tremble, tiny ripples disturbing its still surface. The floorboards vibrated sympathetically beneath my feet. This wasn't a cycle. This was a metabolic process. The motel was digesting. It was performing some vital nocturnal function, and Rule 2 was a clear and simple command. Do not disturb the beast while it feeds. My curiosity warred with a primal terror that screamed at me to stay put. I imagined myself opening the basement door, looking down into the darkness, and seeing not laundry machines but the pulsating bioluminescent organs of some impossible creature. The thought was so vivid, so horrifying, that it rooted me to my chair. The humming was hypnotic, and I found my own breathing starting to fall into its slow, inexorable rhythm. To distract myself, to pull my mind away from the building's monstrous heartbeat, I turned to the only thing I had of Clara, her last entry in the standard guest book. I opened the ledger to the page I'd found earlier. Her signature was there, clear and confident. Clara Vance. Room 14. Date of check-in, October 12th, 2 years ago. Date of check-out, blank. She was the last name in the book. After her entry, the page was empty. The pages that followed were pristine, untouched. Her stay marked the end of the Starlight Rest as a normal motel and the beginning of whatever it was now. I ran my finger over her name, a desperate attempt to feel some connection, some echo of her presence. Had she heard this humming? Had she been given a key? Had she looked in the pool? The rhythmic pulse from below continued its funereal beat, a constant reminder of the abnormal reality I was trapped in. Time seemed to warp and stretch, each minute an eternity. I was adrift in a sea of dread, clutching the iron key in my hand like a useless anchor. The clock on the wall read 1:55 a.m., almost time for the next ritual. Rule 3. After 2 a.m., all mirrors in the common areas must be covered. I pulled open the bottom drawer beneath the register. Inside, just as the manual promised, was a stack of thick black cloths folded with unnerving precision. They felt heavy and dense, like velvet used in a funeral parlor. I stood up, my legs unsteady. The great ornate mirror in the lobby was my first target. It was huge, at least 7 feet tall, framed in dark carved wood. Its surface was a perfect polished sheet of black that reflected the empty lobby with crystalline clarity. As I walked towards it, carrying the cloths, I caught my own reflection approaching, a pale, gaunt figure with wide, terrified eyes. For a moment, I felt a dizzying sense of dissociation, as if I were watching a character in a movie walk toward his doom. I stopped a few feet away, my attention caught by something wrong in the reflection. A flicker, a trick of the light, a distortion at the edge of the glass. I held my breath, watching intently. My reflection stood perfectly still, but in the periphery, something was off. It was a subtle incongruity in the way my reflected self was looking. My own eyes were fixed directly on my reflection's face, but its eyes seemed to be staring at a point just over my shoulder. A cold knot of dread tightened in my stomach. Slowly, deliberately, I forced myself to look closer. "It's just a trick of the light," I whispered, the words sounding feeble and hollow against the ceaseless thrumming from the basement. As I stared into the mirrored eyes, they changed. It was a subtle, horrifying transformation. The face in the mirror began to age, the skin pulling taut over the cheekbones, the hair thinning and receding at the temples. It was no longer my face. It was the face of a man at least 30 years my senior, a stranger. His expression was one of pure, unadulterated panic. His mouth was stretched open in a silent, agonized scream that contorted his features into a mask of despair. But the most terrifying part was his eyes. They weren't looking at my reflection. They were looking out of the mirror. They were looking directly at me. They were pleading. I stumbled backward, a cry catching in my throat, my legs hitting the back of a lobby armchair. I fell into it, my gaze still locked on the mirror. The man's desperate face was still there, trapped behind the glass, his silent scream echoing in the void of my mind. He was a prisoner. And then, as quickly as it had appeared, the image flickered and dissolved. My own reflection snapped back into place, my face a mirror of the stranger's horror, my mouth agape, my eyes wide with terror. The motel does not like to see itself at night. The words of the rule slammed into my mind with the force of a physical blow. It wasn't about vanity, it was about containment. The mirrors weren't windows, they were cages, and at night the prisoners got too close to the glass. Scrambling to my feet, I grabbed the black cloths. My hands shook so violently I could barely unfold the first one. I didn't dare look at the mirror again. I approached it from the side, my eyes fixed on the wall, and with a desperate surge of motion I threw the heavy fabric over it. It clung to the surface, and the effect was immediate. A strange sense of relief washed over me, as if a hostile, piercing gaze had been averted. The simple act of covering the glass felt like I had just blinded a predator. There were 2 more mirrors in the common areas, a smaller, circular one in the main hallway and another behind the front desk. I didn't hesitate. I didn't look. I covered them both with the same frantic urgency. Each time a cloth fell into place, the oppressive atmosphere in the room seemed to lighten, the air growing marginally easier to breathe. The building was blind now, at least in here. I collapsed back into the chair behind the desk, breathing in ragged, shallow gasps. My mind was a maelstrom of terror and revelation. The motel didn't just have rules, it had a history of victims. The man in the mirror was one of them. Was Clara one too? Was her reflection trapped in one of the guest room mirrors, screaming silently into an empty room for the last 2 years? The thought was an agony, a fresh, sharp twist of the knife of my grief. The humming from the basement continued its rhythm, indifferent to my terror. It was the backdrop to this nightmare, the steady pulse of the monster. I sat there in the newly blinded lobby, clutching the cold iron key in one hand, the other resting on the secondary ledger I still hadn't dared to open. I had survived 2 more of the motel's rituals, but surviving wasn't the same as winning. I wasn't an employee. I was an offering, a component in a machine I couldn't comprehend. I looked at the clock, 2:51 a.m. Soon the humming would stop, and soon after that the clock would strike 3:33 a.m., the hour of the non-standard guests. The night was far from over, and I had a horrifying feeling that the next set of instructions would require me to do more than just listen and more than just hide. The next test would bring me face to face with the other residents of the Starlight Rest Motel. The exact moment the humming stopped was more jarring than its presence had been. At precisely 3 a.m., the rhythmic, lifelike pulse that had become the soundtrack to my terror simply ceased. It wasn't a gradual fade, it was an abrupt cutoff, as if a colossal heart had been instantaneously stilled. The silence that rushed in to fill the void was different from before. It was a heavier, more expectant stillness, the kind of absolute quiet that precedes a predator's strike. The building was no longer breathing, it was awake, and it was waiting. My senses were on a razor's edge. Every tiny creak of the old building, every whisper of wind against the window panes, sounded like a gunshot in the vacuum. I sat behind the desk, a statue carved from fear, my eyes glued to the clock. 3:17 a.m. 3:24 a.m. 3:30 a.m. My gaze flickered between the impassive face of the clock and the secondary ledger on the counter. The dark leather book seemed to absorb the light, a small rectangle of pure void in the dim office. The iron key lay next to it, its jagged silhouette a constant menacing presence. I knew what Rule 4 demanded, but my mind couldn't build a rational framework for it. Accept whatever they offer. What kind of economy was this? What was the currency of this place? 3:33 a.m. The numbers on the digital clock clicked over. The air grew thick, heavy with an almost electrical charge. The moment felt significant, a threshold being crossed. I was no longer just a night clerk. I was a gatekeeper, a ferryman on the shore of some Stygian river, and my shift had just begun. I held my breath, listening. For long, agonizing minutes, there was nothing but the frantic drumming of my own blood in my ears. I began to wonder if, like the humming, the guests were a conditional phenomenon. Perhaps tonight I would be spared. That hope dissolved when I saw the headlights. They didn't sweep across the parking lot like a normal car's. Two faint silvery orbs of light simply materialized at the edge of the property, moving toward the office without a sound. There was no engine noise, no crunch of tires on asphalt. A long, black vehicle, impossibly sleek and shaped like a vintage hearse, glided into a parking space with the silence of a phantom. Its finish was so dark it seemed to drink the neon light from the motel sign. The doors opened with an unnerving, silent synchronicity. An elderly couple emerged. The man was tall and rail-thin, dressed in a crisply pressed but hopelessly outdated suit. The woman was equally slender, wearing a simple, high-collared dress that might have been fashionable in the 1940s. They moved together, not walking so much as drifting across the pavement, their feet seeming to float just above the ground. Their faces were the most disquieting part. They were smooth, placid, and utterly devoid of expression, like the waxen faces of antique dolls. Their eyes were wide and dark, and they were fixed on the office door. They entered the lobby as silently as their car had arrived. The glass door slid open and closed without a whisper. They stopped before the front desk, standing side by side, their posture unnaturally rigid. The air around them was frigid, and a faint musty smell, like dried flowers and old paper, reached me. Rule 4 screamed in my mind, "Do not engage in conversation." I remained perfectly still, my hands clenched into fists beneath the counter. I avoided their dark, vacant eyes, focusing on the knot of the man's antique tie. He did not speak. He simply raised a hand, his fingers long, pale, and skeletal. He opened his palm. Resting there was a tarnished silver pocket watch. Its crystal face was fractured, and a network of fine cracks radiated from the center. The ornate hands were frozen, forever pointing to 3:33. The silence stretched, thick and suffocating. This was the offering, a broken piece of time. I knew what I had to do. My hand trembled as I reached out. The instant my fingers brushed against his, a shock of profound, soul-deep cold shot up my arm. His skin wasn't just cold, it was the absence of heat, a chilling void. I snatched the watch from his palm. It was heavier than it looked, and the dead cold clung to the metal. I placed the watch on the counter and turned to the key rack. My fingers fumbled as I plucked a random key, room 9, from its hook. I slid it across the polished surface toward them. The woman's hand, as pale and slender as his, drifted forward and took the key. They turned in unison, a perfectly mirrored motion, and glided back toward the door. I watched them, my heart a wild bird beating against the cage of my ribs. I had to see where they went. I leaned to the side, peering through the large plate glass window of the office. They moved down the covered walkway, past the darkened doors of the other rooms, but they didn't stop at room 9. They continued to the end of the building, and where the walkway met the deep shadows of the surrounding forest, they simply dissolved. They didn't walk into the darkness. They became part of it, absorbed into the night as if they were nothing more than smoke. I sank back into my chair, the cold from the watch seeping into the countertop beside me. My mind was reeling. They weren't ghosts. Ghosts are echoes of the living. These were something else. They were patrons. They had a purpose here. And I was their clerk. Before I could fully process the encounter, another set of lights appeared, just as silently as the first. This time it was a single dim yellow headlight, like that of an old motorcycle, though again there was no engine sound. It cut through the darkness and then extinguished as it parked. A lone figure approached. It was a woman, younger than the couple, though it was hard to tell her age. She wore a simple rain-dampened trench coat, though it wasn't raining. Her dark hair was plastered to her forehead, and her face was pale and drawn. She moved with a slow, weary gait, her shoulders slumped, as if carrying an immense, invisible weight. She entered the lobby and stopped at the counter, her eyes downcast. She smelled of damp earth and something vaguely sweet, like wilting lilies. She too said nothing. Following the protocol I now understood, I waited. She reached into the pocket of her coat and retrieved her offering. It was a photograph, sepia-toned and dog-eared at the corners. She slid it across the counter. Her hand retreated before I could touch it. I picked it up. It was a picture of a small clapboard house, the kind you might see in a rural, forgotten town. But the longer I looked, the more unsettling it became. The geometry was subtly wrong. The roofline sagged at an impossible angle, and the front porch seemed to be tilted forward, as if perpetually spilling its contents onto the lawn. There were too many windows, and they were dark and vacant, like the eyes of the couple. It was a picture of a place that was fundamentally unwell, a sick building. At the bottom, in faded white ink, was a single word: home. A wave of profound sadness washed over me, so intense it was almost nauseating. It wasn't my sadness. It was an echo, a feeling embedded in the photograph itself. The sorrow of leaving or of losing this broken place. I pushed the feeling down, my own grief for Clara, a raw, open wound that this new emotion was irritating. I took another key, room 12, and offered it to her. She took it without looking up, turned and walked back out into the night. Like the couple before her, she didn't seem to walk toward her room. She simply faded into the shadows at the edge of the motel's light, another spectre returning to the gloom. Now I had two artifacts, a broken moment and a lost home. The secondary ledger sat before me, no longer an object of idle curiosity, but a tool of my new bizarre trade. Log the transaction. With trembling hands, I pulled the heavy book closer and opened it to the first page. The paper was thick, almost like parchment, and brittle with age. The first entry was dated over a century ago, the handwriting a spidery, elegant script of fountain pen ink. October 31st, 1921. Guest, a traveller. Payment, the final ember from a hearth now cold. Room 3. I turned the page. The handwriting changed, becoming a more hurried scrawl. June 4th, 1938. Guest, a salesman. Payment, one well-worn but entirely useless map. Room 8, May 20th, 1955. Guest, a runaway. Payment, a single perfect laugh captured in a small glass vial. Room 11. My blood ran cold. A laugh in a vial. An ember. This wasn't a logbook. It was a catalogue of impossibilities. It was a museum of lost things, of concepts and moments given physical form and traded for a night's stay in a place that wasn't a place. I flipped through the pages, a chronology of loss and strangeness. The handwriting changed every few years, a silent testament to the long line of night clerks who had sat in this very chair, performing this very ritual. September 1st, 1969. Guest, a soldier. Payment, one memory of a sunrise sealed in an empty canteen. Room 5, July 15th, 1982. Guest, a musician. Payment, the 7 most beautiful notes of a song he could never finish. Room 14, December 22nd, 1997. Guest, a child. Payment, a recurring nightmare drawn on a piece of scrap paper. Room 2. I felt like I was going to be sick. The motel wasn't just collecting objects. It was harvesting pieces of people's lives, their very souls. It was a repository for the things they could no longer carry. And room 14. The musician's entry from 1982 was for room 14, Clara's room. Was there a connection? Was she drawn to an echo of that unfinished song? My hands were shaking uncontrollably now. I had to find the entries from 2 years ago. I had to see who was the clerk, what they had logged the night Clara disappeared. I flipped frantically toward the back of the book. The handwriting became more modern, a messy ballpoint pen scrawl full of frantic, desperate energy. The entries grew more abstract, more terrifying. April 9th, 2 years ago. Guest, a scholar. Payment, the answer to a question he should never have asked. Room 6, July 28th, 2 years ago. Guest, a liar. Payment, his own reflections trust. Room 1, his own reflections trust. The man in the mirror. My predecessor had logged his damnation. My heart was pounding, a frantic drum against the silence. I was getting close. I turned the page. The date was October 12th, the night Clara checked in. The handwriting was the same desperate scrawl. There were 2 entries. The first was short, October 12th. Guest, a seeker. Payment, a borrowed pocket knife, still warm. Room, 7. The second entry was written below it, the ink darker, pressed so hard into the page it had almost torn through. It was the last entry the previous clerk ever made. October 13th, 3:41 a.m. Guest, the girl from room 14. Payment, the memory of her brother's face. The world tilted. The air left my lungs in a single, silent gasp. It felt like a physical blow, like a fist of ice closing around my heart and squeezing. The girl from room 14. Clara, my Clara. She hadn't been a standard guest. She had come back, or she had never left. She had stayed past 3:33 a.m. She had become a patron. And her payment was me. She had traded her memory of me for a key. The ledger slipped from my numb fingers, falling shut on the counter. The pieces clicked into place, forming a picture of such monstrous, soul-crushing horror that I couldn't breathe. She wasn't missing. She hadn't been taken. She had made a trade. She had paid to stay, to disappear into this place. And the price had been her only connection to the world she'd left behind. The reason no one could find her is because, in her own mind, there was no one left to look for her. I picked up my own acquisitions from the night. The watch frozen at 3:33. The photograph of the broken home. I turned to the last empty page of the ledger. My hand was shaking so badly I could barely hold the pen. But I knew I had to. It was part of the rule. I was part of the system. I wrote, tonight's date, guests, the forgotten. Payment, a broken moment, a lost home. Rooms, 9 and 12. I closed the book. The transaction was complete. But my own purpose here had been irrevocably shattered and remade. I hadn't come here to find my sister. That was impossible. You can't find someone who has paid to be forgotten. I was here to find out why. I looked at the cold iron key on the desk. It wasn't a tool for my survival. It wasn't a clue to Clara's location. It was a key to a deeper level of this place, to its inner workings. And I now understood that whatever it opened, it was a door I had to walk through. Not to save Clara, but to understand what she had become. The revelation in the ledger had hollowed me out, leaving behind a fragile, brittle shell. Grief was no longer the right word for the emotion that consumed me. It was a more complex, terrifying alloy of sorrow, horror, and a profound sense of cosmic betrayal. My sister had willingly traded me away. She had excised my memory from her mind as payment for a room in this purgatorial establishment. The loving, protective sibling I knew had been erased, replaced by the girl from room 14, a spectral patron of a motel that fed on loss. The question wasn't, where is Clara, anymore. It was, what is Clara? My shift continued in a haze of unreality. The sky outside began to soften, the oppressive, inky blackness diluting to a deep, bruised purple at the horizon. Dawn was approaching, but it brought no comfort. The light felt like an intrusion, a temporary reprieve before the cycle began anew. My duties were not yet complete. I looked at the list of rules, my eyes falling on the final, ominous warning. Rule 5. Never, under any circumstances, turn on the exterior pool lights to look at the water during your shift. What is in the water is not meant to be seen. Before, this rule had been a source of abstract dread, a warning against some nameless, physical monster lurking in the depths. Now it felt different. It felt connected. Every rule in this place was part of a system, a ritual. The vending machine was for transactions. The laundry was the building's metabolism. The mirrors were cages for trapped souls. The late-night guests were collectors of metaphysical debt. What then was the pool? If the motel was a living organism, a collector of memories and moments, what function did the pool serve? Was it a stomach, a landfill, or was it something else entirely? The memory of her brother's face. The words were seared into my brain. She had given me away. But where did a memory go when it was traded? Did it simply vanish, or was it stored somewhere? The horrifying thought began to coalesce in my mind. This place didn't destroy what it collected. It curated. The secondary ledger was its catalogue, and the motel itself was its museum. I looked from the useless key on the desk to the dark expanse of the window, beyond which lay the unseen pool. What is in the water is not meant to be seen. A warning can also be an invitation. A prohibition can highlight the very place where answers are hidden. I knew, with a certainty that defied all logic and self-preservation, that I had to break this rule. My predecessor, the man now trapped in the mirror, had become so by yielding to his curiosity about the mirrors. His final ledger entries were frantic, obsessed with reflections. My obsession was now my sister. The risk was absolute, but the alternative, sitting here night after night, logging the spiritual decay of lost souls until my own sanity unraveled, was a slower, more agonizing form of damnation. I had to know what the water held. I had to see where she had put me. My hands felt disconnected from my body as I reached for the switch panel behind the desk. There was a row of rocker switches, clearly labeled: lobby, hallway, parking lot, sign. And at the very end, a larger, solitary switch covered by a clear, spring-loaded safety cap, the kind you see on a self-destruct button in a movie. A small faded label beneath it read, "Pool." It was designed to prevent accidental activation. It was a switch you had to mean to press. My heart hammered a frantic, desperate rhythm against my ribs. I could feel the presence of the motel around me, a silent, watchful intelligence. It had accepted my obedience thus far. This act of defiance felt like sacrilege, like pressing a thumb into the eye of a sleeping god. I took a deep, shuddering breath, lifted the plastic cover, and pushed the switch. There was a heavy thunk as the circuit engaged, followed by a low, electrical hum. Outside, the world was suddenly bathed in a ghostly aquamarine light. I rose from my chair, my legs feeling like lead, and walked to the large window that overlooked the back of the property. My reflection was a pale, translucent ghost against the scene outside. There, in the center of a perfectly manicured patio, was the pool. It was exactly as pristine and unnaturally clean as the rest of the motel. The water was a sheet of placid turquoise glass, so still and clear it didn't look real. The underwater lights cast eerie, wavering patterns on the surrounding concrete. It was beautiful, serene, and utterly terrifying. At first, I saw nothing. Just the clean, tiled bottom, the dark slash of the deep end, the metallic glint of a drain. It was just a pool. My desperate hopes surged. Maybe the rule was a bluff, a simple psychological test. Then I saw the first distortion, a flicker in the water near the deep end, like a heat haze rising from asphalt. It was a subtle warping of the light, a momentary blurring of the clean lines of the pool floor. I pressed my face closer to the cold glass of the window, my breath fogging a small circle. Another flicker appeared, then another. They were coalescing, gathering. The water was not empty. The stillness was a lie. Slowly, like ink bleeding into water, a shape began to form in the depths. It wasn't a solid object. It was a construct of pure memory, a shimmering three-dimensional mirage suspended in the liquid medium. A scene began to play out. I saw the elderly couple from earlier, not as the waxen specters who visited the lobby, but as they once were, young, vibrant, dancing in a long-forgotten ballroom. The image was silent, flickering, a fragment of a life replaying itself in an endless loop. The woman threw her head back in a silent laugh, and the vision dissolved, the water returning to perfect clarity for a moment. This was it. This was the collection. The pool was the archive. The water was a liquid vessel for the memories and moments traded at the front desk. It was a library of stolen lives. Another scene began to form. I saw a man in a dusty fedora, the salesman from the 1938 ledger entry, standing at a crossroads, staring at a useless map, his shoulders slumped in defeat. The image rippled and vanished. Then a little girl sitting on a bed, her face contorted in terror as a shadowy shape with too many joints crawled out from under her bed. The nightmare, given form. It was a gallery of captured souls, each one a flickering, silent film playing out its defining moment of loss for no audience. My breath hitched. I was watching a silent, aquatic hell. I searched the depths, my eyes scanning frantically, dread and a sliver of desperate hope warring within me. I had to see her. I had to know what her moment looked like. And then I found her. Her image coalesced near the shallow steps, clearer and more stable than the others, as if it were a more recent acquisition. It was Clara, my Clara. She stood beside the pool, her back to me, looking out across the water. She was wearing the same jacket she had on the day she left. I could see the familiar way she held her shoulders, the slight tilt of her head. A sob, raw and painful, escaped my lips. It was her, real, tangible yet utterly unreachable. The scene was incomplete. She was just standing there, motionless. Then her memory self turned. Her face was pale, her eyes wide with a look of profound, soul-shattering terror that I had never seen before. Her gaze was fixed on something in the water before her. I followed her line of sight, my own eyes tracing a path across the shimmering surface to the deep end. Something was rising from the drain at the bottom. It wasn't another memory. It was a shape of pure darkness, an absence of light and color that seemed to suck the aquamarine glow into itself. It was an amorphous, oily blot that grew and writhed, a living shadow ascending through the water. It had no face, no limbs, no discernible form, but I felt an ancient, malevolent intelligence radiating from it. This was the curator, the archivist, the thing that was not meant to be seen. The Clara memory took a step back, her hand flying to her mouth, her silent scream visible in the taut lines of her face. The dark entity in the water paused, seeming to sense my observation. The entire pool seemed to hold its breath. The wavering light from the underwater lamps stilled, and then, in a gesture of horrifying, deliberate communication, the shadow entity began to change shape. It stretched and molded itself, the darkness coalescing with terrifying speed. It formed a face. My face. It was my own visage, rendered in perfect three-dimensional shadow, floating in the deep end of the pool. It looked back at the memory of Clara, and its empty, lightless eyes then shifted, turning with impossible perception to look directly out of the water, through the window and into me. It saw me. It knew I was watching, and it knew what I was looking for. The memory of my face, the payment she had made, smiled. It was a grotesque, predatory grin. Then it lunged. The shadow self shot through the water, a torpedo of pure darkness, and slammed into the shimmering mirage of my sister. She didn't scream. Her image simply dissolved on impact, shattering into a million points of fading light, like dust motes in a sunbeam. The pool was empty again, save for the dark shape now sinking slowly, contentedly, back toward the drain at the bottom. It had shown me. It had taken her memory of me, showed it to me, and then devoured her captured image right before my eyes as a demonstration, a punishment for my transgression, a warning. The lights in the pool flickered violently and then went out, plunging the world outside back into darkness. At the same moment, every light inside the motel, the lobby, the office, the hallway, extinguished, leaving me in absolute, suffocating blackness. The power was cut. The building was sealed. I was alone in the dark, with the knowledge that I had been seen by the thing that lived in the water. I had broken the most important rule of all. And now, the motel was no longer waiting for me to perform my duties. It was coming for me. The instantaneous plunge into absolute darkness was a physical blow. One moment, the sterile, overlit lobby was my cage. The next, the entire world was gone, replaced by a suffocating, velvety blackness, so complete it felt like I'd been swallowed whole. The abrupt silence that followed the death of the lights was even more terrifying. The gentle hum of the electronics, the buzz of the neon sign, the faint drone of the ventilation, all of it was gone. The motel wasn't just dark, it was dead. And in that dead silence, my own frantic heartbeat was a cannonade. Panic, cold and sharp, sank its claws into me. I scrambled backward from the window, my hands flailing in the void until the back of my legs hit the front desk. I fumbled in my pockets, my fingers numb and clumsy, searching for my phone. The small rectangular shape was a lifeline. I thumbed the power button, and the screen flared to life, a blinding rectangle of white in the oppressive dark. The light was a feeble weapon, carving out a small, trembling bubble of reality in an ocean of nothingness, but it was enough. I wasn't blind anymore. My first thought was a circuit breaker, a power surge from the pool lights. It was a rational explanation, a flimsy shield of logic I held up against the encroaching madness. I swept the phone's beam across the back office wall, looking for the breaker box. That's when I heard the first sound. It was a soft, wet, dragging noise. Shh, thump, shh, thump. It was coming from outside, from the direction of the pool. The sound of something heavy and saturated being pulled across the concrete patio. I froze, my blood turning to ice. My mind conjured the image of the shadow entity, the amorphous darkness, pouring itself out of the pool's basin and taking on a more physical form. I imagined it dragging its newly corporeal body towards the lobby, drawn by the scent of my defiance. Shh, thump, shh, thump. It was closer now, just outside the glass doors of the lobby. I killed my phone's light, plunging myself back into the disorienting black. If I couldn't see it, maybe it couldn't see me. It was the desperate primal logic of a child hiding from a monster under the blankets. The dragging sound stopped directly in front of the entrance. I held my breath, my lungs burning. I could feel its presence, a palpable miasma of ancient cold and profound wrongness pressing against the building. Then came a new sound, a delicate rhythmic ticking. Tick, tick, tock, tick. It was the sound of a fingernail tapping lightly, insistently, on the glass of the front door. The casual, almost playful nature of the sound was 1,000 times more terrifying than a roar or a screech would have been. It wasn't a mindless beast. It was intelligent, it was patient, and it was trying to get in. My mind raced, cycling through the rules, the manual of this infernal place. There was no rule for this, no protocol for what to do when the system itself turned against you, when the zookeeper became the exhibit. The rules were for maintaining the balance, and I had shattered it. The tapping stopped. The silence that followed was heavy with intent. Then, a low, guttural voice rumbled, not from the door, but from everywhere at once. It resonated through the floor, vibrated in the walls, and seemed to speak directly into the bones of my skull. "We see you," it rasped, the voice a chorus of 1,000 whispers, a collage of every soul whose memory was trapped in the water. "The collection is incomplete." My stomach clenched. It wasn't just punishing me for looking. It wanted something. In my frantic search for Clara, in my desperate need to see her memory, I had shown the entity something new. I had exposed it to my own raw, potent grief, my own unique connection to a former patron. I had inadvertently put myself on display. I had become a collectible. A loud crack echoed through the lobby as a fracture line appeared on the plate glass of the front door, splintering outward from the point where the tapping had been. It wasn't coming for me as punishment. It was coming for me as an acquisition. I had to move. I had to hide. The back office was a dead end. The hallways were a shooting gallery. My mind latched onto the only place that had its own set of prohibitions, its own sacred space: the basement. Rule 2. Under no circumstances are you to interrupt this cycle or enter the laundry room during this period. The cycle was over. The period had passed. It wasn't a safe place, but it was a forbidden one. Perhaps the creature's influence was weaker there, in the very heart of the motel's metabolic functions. Another crack, louder this time, and the sound of glass tinkling onto the lobby floor. It was getting in. I switched my phone light back on, the beam shaking wildly, and scrambled behind the front desk. I wrenched open the heavy metal door to the basement, the one I had been too terrified to touch before. A wave of damp, cold air, thick with the smell of ozone and wet earth, washed over me. The stairs were steep, wooden and slick with some kind of condensation. I didn't hesitate. I plunged down into the darkness below, pulling the heavy door shut behind me. I heard the deadbolt on the other side, the one I had no way of locking, click uselessly into its housing. It wouldn't hold anything, but the psychological barrier was all I had. The basement was a cavern of blackness. My phone's light cut a nervous, dancing path across a scene of industrial horror. This was no laundry room. The walls were weeping with moisture, and the floor was a slick of shallow, stagnant water. But the center of the room was dominated by what could only be described as the motel's heart. It was a colossal, pulsating mass of pipes, valves, and conduits, all converging on a central drum-like furnace of rusted iron. This was the source of the humming, the cleaning cycle. It was a grotesque mechanical organ, and even now, silent and dormant, it seemed to thrum with a latent, malevolent energy. The air down here was thick, vibrating with a low-frequency hum that was felt more than heard. It was the building's baseline life sign. I was inside the beast. I backed away from the mechanical heart, my light sweeping across the rest of the space. There were old discarded pieces of furniture draped in white sheets, like rows of forgotten tombstones. And there, in the far corner, was something else. A small cot-like bed, a rickety nightstand, and a scattering of personal effects. Someone had lived down here. I moved closer, my feet splashing in the shallow water. On the nightstand was a small, leather-bound journal. It was the same messy, desperate handwriting as the last entries in the secondary ledger. It was the journal of my predecessor. I snatched it up, my fingers leaving wet prints on the cover. I flicked through the pages, my light illuminating his frantic scrawl. The first half of the journal was an obsessive documentation of the rules, of the guests, of his growing terror. But the second half was different. It detailed his discovery. He too had broken a rule. He had looked in a mirror after hours for too long and seen not just a trapped soul, but a way to communicate with them. They are not just prisoners, he had written, the ink bleeding from the dampness. They are a warning system. They are the motel's discarded antibodies. They see the sickness. The man in the mirror, his name was Arthur, a guest from the 50s. He told me about the collection. He told me about the key. My eyes widened. The iron key. I pulled it from my pocket. It was freezing cold, colder even than the basement air. The key is not for a door, the journal continued. It is a tuning fork. The motel is a machine, a prison of captured moments. But every prison has a flaw in its design, a resonant frequency that can disrupt its function. The key is attuned to that frequency. Arthur said the key's purpose is not to open a way out, but to unlock what is held inside, to cause a catastrophic release, a jailbreak. A jailbreak. To release the memories from the pool, the souls from the mirrors. The thought was both exhilarating and terrifying. Could I unleash that much chaos? Could I fight back? A tremendous boom from upstairs shook the entire basement, and dust rained down from the ceiling. The creature was in the lobby. I could hear it now. A heavy, dragging weight moving across the floor, punctuated by the splintering crack of wood as it tore the front desk apart, searching for me. The journal had more. The furnace is the heart. The water from the pool is the blood. The system is all connected. The key must be introduced at the heart during a cycle. It will poison the entire organism. But the backlash... Arthur says the backlash will be absolute. The motel will purge itself of everything. Every memory. Every soul. Every living thing inside it. It was a suicide mission. A mutual destruction pact. To free the souls trapped here, I would have to be destroyed along with them. I looked at the grotesque furnace, then at the key in my hand. The dragging sound upstairs stopped. A new sound began. A low, inquisitive sniffing. It was hunting me by scent. It knew I was down here. Suddenly, the phone in my hand rang, the shrill electronic noise an obscene violation of the tomb-like silence. The screen lit up with an unknown number. My heart leaped into my throat. With a trembling finger, I answered it. Static, pure, hissing static, loud and aggressive, just like the rule. If you hear only static, hang up immediately. But then, a voice broke through, faint and distorted, as if from a great distance. Leo! It was a whisper, but I knew it instantly. It was Clara, my sister's voice, filtering through the veil of this haunted place. Clara? Clara, is that you? I cried, my voice cracking. You shouldn't have looked, she whispered, her voice laced with the same ethereal static. He sees you now. He wants your connection to me. It's a rare piece for the collection. Where are you? I pleaded. "Are you in the water?" "I am the water," she replied, her voice sounding less like a person and more like an echo. "I am the room. I am the memory. I paid the price, Leo. I wanted to forget." "Why did you make him remember me?" The heavy metal door at the top of the stairs began to buckle inward, a deep concave dent forming in its center as something of immense weight pressed against it. "He's coming," her voice said, fading. "The only way to stop the collection is to become a part of it, or to burn it all down." The line went dead. The furnace in the center of the room began to glow, a faint, deep red light pulsing from within its iron belly. A low hum started, the beginning of an unscheduled cleaning cycle. The motel was reacting to the foreign body, to me. It was preparing to purge, to digest. The door upstairs groaned, the metal tearing at the hinges. I was out of time. 2 choices. Become another ghost in the machine, another flickering memory in the pool, or burn it all down. I looked at the key in my hand, then at the glowing, pulsating heart of the motel. My predecessor had failed. He had hidden down here, studying, until the motel had taken him. He hadn't had the courage to act, but he had left me the instructions. The door at the top of the stairs was torn from its frame with a deafening screech of metal. A colossal, shadowy form, all wet sinew and shifting darkness, blocked the exit. It lowered what passed for a head, and 2 points of cold, aquamarine light, the same light from the pool, fixed on me. It had found me. I didn't run. There was nowhere to run. I held the iron key high, my knuckles white. My grief for Clara, my terror, my despair, it all melted away, reforged into a single cold point of resolve. She had wanted to forget, but I would make this place remember. I would become the memory that could not be collected. I turned and ran, not away from the creature, but straight toward the glowing, ravenous heart of the machine. The longest night of my life was finally ending, but the worst was yet to come. Before we uncover the truth, subscribe to the channel and comment below. What do you think the Starlight Rest Motel really is? The moments that followed were a chaotic symphony of fire, sound, and fury. As I charged toward the pulsating iron furnace, the colossal shadow thing at the top of the stairs let out a sound that was not a roar, but a deafening chord of static, the same noise from the telephone call amplified 1,000 times. It was the sound of 1,000 voices screaming in unison, a chorus of the damned protesting my final desperate act of rebellion. The creature lunged down the stairs, its form dissolving into a tidal wave of oily darkness and shimmering water, a flood of liquid memory cascading into the basement. There was no time for finesse. The furnace was now glowing a cherry red, its rhythmic humming escalating into a hungry, high-pitched whine. The cleaning cycle was initiating, a feverish immune response to my presence. I could feel the heat baking my face, the air shimmering around the iron behemoth. The journal's final, desperate words echoed in my mind. The key must be introduced at the heart. I looked for an opening, a port, a seam in the machinery. On the side of the main drum I saw it, a small, circular maintenance hatch held shut by a simple lever. It glowed brighter than the rest of the surface, a clear focal point of the immense energy building within. The wave of darkness was almost upon me. The faces of the forgotten, Arthur, the musician, the soldier, swirling in its depths, their spectral forms contorted in silent agony. They weren't attacking me. They were reaching for me, trying to pull me under. With my last ounce of strength, I threw my shoulder against the lever on the hatch. It was searing hot, the metal searing through my jacket and shirt, but it gave way with a groaning shriek of tortured metal. The circular door swung open, revealing the motel's core. It wasn't fire inside. It was a blinding vortex of pure white light, a miniature sun of compressed energy, and at its center a perfect sphere of absolute blackness, a singularity of nothingness that was the source of the immense power. I didn't hesitate. I reared back my arm and hurled the ancient iron key into the vortex. The effect was instantaneous and apocalyptic. The moment the key, the resonant flaw, the tuning fork of discord, crossed the event horizon of the singularity, the entire basement was flooded with an unearthly violet light. The high-pitched whine of the furnace flatlined into a single, ear-splitting tone that vibrated through my very bones, threatening to tear me apart. The key hadn't just been introduced, it had been utterly annihilated, its unique frequency unleashed in a single catastrophic burst. It was a poison pill dropped into the heart of a god. A shockwave of pure energy erupted from the furnace. It wasn't a wave of force, but of information, a psychic tsunami. Every memory, every stolen moment, every trapped soul that the motel had collected for over a century was violently ejected from the system. The torrent of darkness that had been about to consume me was blasted backward, and as it struck the walls, it shattered into a million individual specters. The basement became a hurricane of ghosts. The air was thick with them. The young couple from the ballroom danced through the discarded furniture, their forms solidifying for a glorious, final instant. The soldier stood tall, saluting a sunrise only he could see. The musician played the final 7 notes of his lost song, a melody so beautiful and heartbreaking it brought tears to my eyes. And Arthur, the man from the mirror, floated before me for a fraction of a second, his face no longer a mask of panic, but of serene, grateful release. He gave me a single solemn nod and then dissolved into motes of golden light. The psychic backlash slammed into me, and I was thrown backward, my head cracking against the damp concrete floor. My own memories flashed before my eyes, not as a gentle slideshow, but as a violent, chaotic assault. My childhood, my parents, every friend I'd ever made, every secret I'd ever kept. And Clara. Hundreds of memories of Clara, so vivid and real, it felt like I was reliving them all at once. Her laugh, the way she'd ruffle my hair, the serious talks we had late at night. The sheer, overwhelming force of it was an agony and an ecstasy. The system was crashing, and it was taking its entire library with it. Then I felt a new presence. Amidst the storm of departing souls, one was coalescing before me. It was her, the girl from room 14, Clara. She knelt beside me, her form shimmering, translucent, but her face was clearer than it had been in the water. The vacant, haunted look was gone. Her eyes were her own again, and in them I saw a flicker of recognition, a dawning horror. "Leo," she whispered, her voice a fragile echo. The memory of me, the one she had traded away, was being forced back into her consciousness by the system's violent purge. She was remembering. "I'm here, Clara," I choked out, reaching a hand toward her shimmering form. My fingers passed right through her. "What did you do?" she asked, her voice trembling as the full weight of her choice, of 2 years spent in a soulless limbo, came crashing down on her. I gave you away. Oh God, Leo, I'm so sorry." "It's okay," I lied, my vision starting to swim, the edges of the world turning dark. "It's over." "No," she said, a profound sadness in her spectral eyes. "It's never over. The collection is empty now, but a collector always needs a collection." Her form began to flicker, to dissolve like the others. "It's broken, Leo, but it will rebuild. It needs a new heart, a new archivist." Her voice faded as her form was pulled apart, her last look one of love and terror. The single deafening tone from the furnace finally died, and the violent storm of memories ceased. The basement fell into a profound, exhausted silence. The last thing I saw before I lost consciousness was the vortex inside the furnace collapsing, the brilliant white light and the black singularity folding in on themselves until they were gone, leaving only a dark, empty space. And from that empty space, a single, impossibly fine strand of black thread, like a spider's silk, drifted out and settled gently on my chest. I awoke to the smell of disinfectant and the soft grey light of morning filtering through a window. For a wild, disorienting moment, I thought I was in a hospital, but the ceiling was too low, the air too still. I sat up. I was in a motel room, room 14, my room. The room was clean, sterile, every surface wiped down. My clothes were folded neatly on a chair. There was no sign of the night's apocalyptic events. No broken glass, no damaged furnace, no lingering ghosts. I stumbled out of the room into the main lobby. It was pristine. The front desk was polished, the mirrors were uncovered, and the morning sun streamed through the spotless glass of the front door. It was as if the horrors of the night had been nothing more than a fever dream, a hallucination brought on by grief and exhaustion. But I knew it was real. On the front desk, Two objects sat side by side, the secondary ledger and a new laminated manual. The leather of the ledger looked different. It was no longer old and cracked. It was a rich, supple black, the pages within pristine and perfectly blank. The manual was new too. The title read, Nightly Acquisitions Protocol. My blood ran cold. It wasn't an operations manual anymore. With a sense of grim inevitability, I opened it. The rules were different. They weren't about maintenance. They were about purpose. Rule 1. At midnight, the vending machine must be calibrated. Offer it a memory of your own choosing. It will provide you with a tool for the night's acquisitions. Rule 2. The basement is now the vault. Do not enter unless making a deposit. The collection must be kept in absolute stillness. Rule 3. The mirrors now serve as the catalogue. Gaze into them to review the collection and identify weaknesses in potential acquisitions. Rule 4. Guests who arrive after 3:33 a.m. are donors. Their offerings are the foundation of the new collection. Log them with precision. You are a historian of forgotten things. Rule 5. The pool is the scrying glass. Use it to find those who are lost, those who are grieving, those who are desperate. Draw them to the Starlight Rest. The collection must grow. I closed the manual, a wave of cold, desolate understanding washing over me. I hadn't destroyed the motel. I had rebooted it. By destroying its heart and its collection, I had created a vacuum. And in my final defiant act, I had become the most valuable and unique artifact in the building, the only living thing that knew its secrets. The motel had chosen its new heart, its new curator, its new collector. Clara's final words echoed in my mind. It needs a new archivist. My search for my sister was over. I had found her, and in doing so, I had taken her place. I was no longer Leo Vance, the grieving brother. I was the night clerk. The system wasn't a cycle I was trapped in. It was a system I now controlled. My purpose was no longer to find what was lost, but to collect it. The front door opened with a soft chime. A young woman stood there, her eyes red-rimmed from crying, her backpack slung over a weary shoulder. She looked lost, broken, desperate, the perfect first piece for a new collection. I stood behind the desk, a calm, empty smile spreading across my face. It didn't feel like my smile, but it was the one I now wore. "Welcome to the Starlight Rest," I said, my voice smooth and devoid of all emotion. "We have a vacancy. What do you have to offer? The night always returns, and the collector must always be ready."